So how do you know which kind of hedging model the client is or your company is dealing with, right? So this is the trick, right? And maybe the way I look at it may not be the way that most people look at it, but this is the way I kind of simply try to evaluate this. So let's start with, behavior of risk before and after. So when I think about, and I look at it from a cash flow perspective, right? And this will be a good indication between a cash flow hedge and a fair value hedge. The hedge of a net investment is actually pretty easy to identify. So let's at least first of all take a look at behavior of the risk before and then after. And I'm going to actually think about this is what's the behavior of cash before the derivative and what's the behavior of cash after the derivative, right? So that's the way I like to look at things. Behavior of cash flows. So before after, and I'm looking at the hedged item. Okay. So when I'm looking at the hedged item, all right, and I look at the cash flows before I put on the derivative, right? So this is the derivative, right? And so I take a look at this, I put the derivative on, and then how does the cash change, right? How does the nature of the cash, the behavior of the cash change, right? So before, let's think about cash being variable. So here, cash flows are variable for a particular hedged item, okay? So cash flows are variable. So once I put the derivative in place, cash flows become fixed. When I have this particular type of situation with my hedged item, and then I put the derivative in place, and now the cash flow has changed, this is a cash flow hedge. Right? Because what I'm doing is, what is my concern? Well, let's go back to what my concern was with a cash flow hedge. With a cash flow hedge, my concern was that cash was moving up and down, right? And my concern was that I didn't, that the cash that I have to pay would increase, or the cash that I would receive would decrease, right? This becomes a cash flow hedge when I can put in a derivative and mitigate the changes in cash flow. And that's what you see here. So let's think about the alternative. So before, cash flows are fixed. Cash flows are fixed. Then I put in the derivative. I put in the derivative. And then afterwards, cash flows become variable. So think about inventory. So I've got a bunch of steel inventory, and I'm hopefully going to be able to sell it for whatever I think it's worth today, right? Well, what happens if the price of that inventory goes down? Well, the fair value of that asset has also gone down. Okay, the fair value of that has gone down, right? Because I'm in X. I'm in for X number of fixed cash flows. This is how much I'm going to be able to get. Another way to look at it is, say I've got a fixed income instrument that I'm only going to get paid this set rate of interest each and every time. And I'm concerned that the rates are going to go in such a way that if I didn't have this fixed cash flows, and if rates all of a sudden go up, then the fair value of this investment is going to go down, right? If I've got a piece of inventory, and I think that the prices are going to go down, well, the fair value of that inventory is now going to go down. That becomes a problem for me. So I want to take the fixed cash flows that I have, and I want to make them variable. Right? I want to basically save whatever fair value I have in my asset and capture that. Right? So in this particular case, when you move, because if you think about fixed income investments is the easy example. As interest rates go up in a fixed income instrument, the fair value of the instrument goes down. Well, I want to capture that and make sure that my fair value doesn't change. So the way to do that is by allowing my cash flows to start varying and capture whatever the fair value is in that particular asset. So this is a fair value hedge. With a net investment hedge, right? The net investment hedge is a little bit different, right? Because there's a little bit of everything going on. And I have no idea, and the only thing that I'm really hedging is the FX risk in my net assets. So it's not going to be viewed purely as a cash flow or a fair value hedge. It's a hedge of a net investment position, and only dealing with the FX position. So I'm invested, I've got net assets, they're valued at whatever the foreign exchange rate is to my current currency. Well, those are easy to see because we're looking at, and it's going to be very clear that it doesn't matter what the cash flows are before and after. I'm trying to identify net assets being hedged by some kind of derivative. Or in the case of net asset, hedging net asset risk, you can also hedge with a non-derivative instrument. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into foreign currency discussions. So this is just a simple way of thinking about, am I dealing with a cash flow hedge? Well, think about what are the cash flows before versus what are the cash flows after. Before, after. And try to think about, well, what is it that they're trying to manage here, right? What is the risk that they're trying to really identify, right? They're concerned about the changes in the fair value of an asset, or are they concerned about the changes in the cash flows? That will also help you figure out whether or not you're dealing with a cash flow hedge or a fair value hedge.